You ever have one of those moments where you think you're seeing things, where reality just shifts? That's exactly what hit me when I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday evening and saw Karen Whitmore's silver minivan parked sideways across my electric gates like she owned the place. I'm James Collins, 52 years old, and if you're watching Karenology, you know these stories don't end with handshakes and apologies. This one nearly destroyed everything I'd built in 15 years of living on Maple Ridge Drive. Picture this. Expensive automatic gates I'd saved 2 years to install, blocked by 2 tons of suburban entitlement. Karen's standing there with her phone out, snapping photos of my property like she's documenting a crime scene. The woman's built like a linebacker in a floral dress. Blonde hair pulled back so tight, it probably gave her a headache. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping from my truck. The smell of fresh mulch from my neighbor's yard mixed with exhaust fumes in the humid air. She didn't even look up, just kept photographing. "These gates are illegal," she announced to whoever was on the other end of her phone call. "Height violation, electrical hazard, probably stealing power from the neighborhood grid." My hands tightened around my keys. "Those are my gates, on my property, with full permits." That's when she finally looked at me. Cold blue eyes, the kind that calculated your net worth before deciding if you deserved basic respect. "I'm Karen Whitmore, Homeowner Association Compliance Officer. These gates violate Section 12 of our architectural standards." She held up her phone. "I've got pictures, measurements, everything." I reached for my gate remote. Nothing, not even a click. Karen smiled. "Oh, and I had the power company check your electrical connection. Turns out someone's been drawing unauthorized power from the street lines." She shrugged like she was discussing the weather. "Temporary disconnect for safety investigation. Should only take a few weeks to sort out." Have you ever felt your stomach drop so fast you thought you might be having a heart attack? That cold rush when you realize someone just played a card you didn't even know was in the deck. You can't just... Actually, I can. She climbed back into her minivan, engine already running. Public safety trumps personal convenience every time, Mr. Collins. Maybe next time you'll follow proper procedures. As her taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood there staring at my dead gates. $1,500 of German engineering reduced to expensive yard art by a woman who probably couldn't wire a lamp without calling her husband. I had no idea that Karen Whitmore had just fired the first shot in a war that would cost her everything she'd built in this neighborhood. But first, she was going to make me pay a price I never saw coming. The smell of rain hung heavy in the evening air, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning. The next morning, I'm standing in my bathrobe with a cup of coffee, watching a city inspector truck pull up to my curb. 7:15 a.m. These people don't waste time. Out steps Mark Davenport, clipboard in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, the kind of guy who'd peaked in high school and never quite recovered. He's got that defeated government employee shuffle down to an art form. "Mr. Collins, I'm here about your gate situation." He doesn't make eye contact. "Got a complaint yesterday about unauthorized electrical connections." I set my coffee down hard enough to slosh it onto my porch rail. "Unauthorized? I've got permits for everything. Want to see them?" That's not really the issue. He's already walking toward my gates, making notes. "See, when someone files a safety complaint, we have to follow protocol. Power stays off until we can verify everything meets current code." Current code. Like the code changes every Tuesday depending on who's filing complaints. I followed him to the gate mechanism, pulling out my phone to show him the electrical permit. "Look, this was all approved 18 months ago. Licensed electrician, city inspection, the works." Davenport glanced at the screen for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah, but that was under the old standards. New safety requirements went into effect last month." He tapped his clipboard. "Plus, the complainant provided photographic evidence of potential hazards." "What hazards?" He shrugged. "Honestly, I can't really tell from the photos. But policy is policy. We disconnect first, investigate later. Keeps everyone safe." Safe. Right. Safe from what, exactly? The terrible danger of me being able to open my own gates without getting out of my truck? How long until I can get power restored? Depends. He was already walking back to his truck. Could be a week, could be a month. Depends on our inspection schedule and whether any other complaints come in. I watched him drive away. that sick feeling in my stomach growing stronger. This wasn't about electrical safety. This was about someone flexing muscle they shouldn't have. Later that morning, I'm manually opening my gates, 200 pounds of steel that weren't designed for hand operation, when Mrs. Chen from across the street waves me over. "James," she says, lowering her voice like she's sharing state secrets. "That woman with the van yesterday, she was taking pictures of more than just your gates." "What do you mean?" "Your mailbox, your driveway, even your lawn sprinklers." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "Been here 30 years, never seen anything like it. She spent 20 minutes measuring the distance from your fence to the sidewalk with some kind of tool. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture wasn't pretty. That afternoon, I called the electrical contractor who'd installed my system, Tommy Russo, old Army buddy, straight shooter. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it was him. "James, I've been in this business 15 years, he said when I explained the situation. "What you're describing, that's not a safety inspection. That's someone building a case." Building a case for what? But I was about to find out, because that evening I found the first notice in my mailbox. Bright yellow paper, official letterhead, Notice of Code Violation, Homeowner Association Architectural Committee. The list made my blood boil. Excessive gate height, non-conforming materials, unpermitted electrical installation. Each violation carried a $200 fine, due within 10 days. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, Compliance Officer Karen Whitmore. I stood there in my driveway, holding $800 worth of fines for gates that had been approved by every authority that mattered, and realized something that should have terrified me. Karen Whitmore had no idea who she was messing with. The Emergency Homeowner Association meeting was called for Thursday night at 7 p.m., Riverside Community Center. I knew it was about me before I even opened the official notice. You don't live in suburbia for 15 years without learning how these things work. Walking into that beige-walled room felt like entering a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. Folding chairs arranged in rows, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee from a machine that should have been retired during the Clinton administration. Patricia Stearns sat at the front table like a queen holding court. Silver hair perfectly styled, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who'd never worked a day outside the home, but somehow knew everything about running everyone else's life. She'd been homeowner association president for 8 years, and it showed in the way she looked at residents like we were tenants who'd forgotten to pay rent. Karen Whitmore sat beside her with a laptop and a stack of printed photos that looked thick enough to choke a horse. About 30 neighbors filled the chairs. Some I recognized, others were strangers who'd apparently come for the show. Mrs. Chen gave me a sympathetic nod from the back row. Most everyone else avoided eye contact. "This emergency session," Patricia announced, "addresses serious violations of our community standards by a resident on Maple Ridge Drive." She didn't say my name. Didn't need to. Karen stood up, smoothing her floral dress like she was accepting an award. "Thank you, Patricia. What we're dealing with here is a clear pattern of disregard for the architectural integrity of our neighborhood." She clicked her laptop, and suddenly my gates filled a projection screen at the front of the room. Blown up to poster size, they looked industrial, almost menacing. The photography was strategic, shot from a low angle that made them appear massive, overwhelming. "Industrial-grade gates in a residential setting," Karen continued. "Height exceeds community standards by 18 inches. Material composition violates our requirement for natural wood or approved composite materials." Click, another photo, my electrical junction box. Unauthorized electrical installation creating potential safety hazards for neighboring properties. Her voice had that practiced tone of someone who'd given this presentation before. "City inspector confirmed improper connections to municipal power grid." I started to stand. "That's not..." Patricia held up her hand. "You'll have your turn to speak, Mr. Collins." Karen wasn't finished. Click. A photo of my mailbox. Click. My driveway. Click. My sprinkler system. Mailbox height violation. Unpermitted driveway extension. Irrigation system impact on community water pressure. Each accusation delivered with surgical precision. What we're seeing is systematic disregard for community standards. The room was dead quiet except for the hum of that ancient air conditioning unit struggling against the summer heat. The Architectural Committee, Patricia said, consulting her notes, has reviewed these violations and determined immediate action is required. She looked up at me with the expression of a disappointed school principal. Mr. Collins, you have 10 days to bring your property into compliance or face mandatory removal of non-conforming elements. Mandatory removal. They wanted me to tear down my own gates. Furthermore, Karen added, given the serious safety concerns, the association is imposing emergency fines totaling $2,000, plus daily penalties until compliance is achieved. $2,000 for gates that had been legally installed on my own property. I stood up, and every head in the room turned toward me. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I've got permits for everything you just showed, I said, keeping my voice level. City approved, electrician certified, all by the book. Karen smiled. Permits that predate our updated architectural standards, Mr. Collins. Standards that every resident agreed to follow when they purchased property in this community. I never agreed to tear down legally installed improvements. You agreed, Patricia said, to abide by association rules when you bought your house. Those rules include compliance with updated standards as they're implemented. The legal trap was perfect. They'd changed the rules after I'd followed the old ones, then held me responsible for violations that didn't exist when I'd done the work. I looked around the room at my neighbors. Some stared at their hands. Others watched me with the fascination of people driving past a car accident. What if I refuse? Karen's smile got wider. Then we'll file a lien against your property and pursue foreclosure proceedings to recover association costs and penalties. Foreclosure. They were threatening to take my house because they didn't like my gates. I walked out of that meeting knowing I was in a fight I hadn't chosen, against opponents who'd stacked the deck before dealing the first card. But Karen Whitmore had made one critical mistake that night. She'd assumed I was the kind of man who'd roll over and take it. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tommy Russo showed up at my house Saturday morning with a toolbox and the kind of serious expression that meant trouble. We'd served together in Iraq, back when problems got solved with clear thinking and direct action. Civilian life had made things more complicated, but Tommy still knew how to cut through the noise. Something's not right with your electrical setup, he said, kneeling beside my gate mechanism. The morning sun caught the gray in his hair, reminding me we weren't 25 anymore. Mind if I take a look? I handed him my gate key. Knock yourself out. Maybe you can explain how legally installed wiring suddenly became a safety hazard. He popped open the junction box and started tracing wires with a voltage tester. 2 minutes in, he stopped and called me over. James, look at this. He pointed to a section of insulation that looked like it had been chewed by a very neat, very precise rat. This damage is fresh, maybe 2-3 days old. What kind of damage? The kind that creates exactly the safety hazard your inspector friend was worried about. Tommy straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Someone stripped this insulation deliberately, made it look like deterioration, but see these marks? That's a wire stripper, not natural wear. The implications hit me like cold water. Someone sabotaged my system? Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Create a short circuit? Make the installation look dangerous. Give the city grounds to shut you down. He closed the box and locked it. Question is, who had access? I thought about Karen Whitmore with her phone and her measuring tools, spending 20 minutes in my front yard while I was at work. I might have an idea. That afternoon, I was replacing a sprinkler head in my front yard when my neighbor Linda Parker walked over. 50-something, divorced, usually friendly enough to wave when she saw me. Today she looked like she had something difficult to say. James, I heard about the association meeting. She glanced around like she was worried about being overheard. I wanted you to know, not everyone agrees with what's happening. Appreciate that, Linda. It's just... She hesitated. Some people are saying maybe you should have been more careful about following the rules from the beginning. There it was, the subtle shift that happens in neighborhoods when the association flexes its muscle. Suddenly your friends start hedging their bets, worried about being associated with the troublemaker. I followed every rule that existed when I installed those gates. I know, but Karen showed us the photos. They do look pretty imposing. Linda's voice got smaller. Maybe if you just modified them a little, made them more in keeping with the neighborhood character? Made them more in keeping with the neighborhood character. That was association speak for give them what they want and maybe they'll stop. Like, Linda, if I back down now, what happens to the next person they decide doesn't fit their vision? She didn't have an answer for that. Just gave me a weak smile and walked back to her house, probably already composing her explanation for why she'd been seen talking to the neighborhood pariah. That evening, I was grilling a steak on my back deck when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Mr. Collins, this is Detective Rodriguez with the county sheriff's office. We've received a complaint that you made threatening statements toward another resident. The steak suddenly tasted like cardboard. What kind of threatening statements? The complainant says you approached her at a public meeting and used intimidating language, made her feel unsafe. Rodriguez's voice was professional, but tired. I know how these neighborhood disputes go, Mr. Collins. Usually it's all heat and no fire, but I have to follow up on every complaint. Who filed the complaint? Karen Whitmore says you confronted her after an association meeting and made statements she interpreted as threats of physical harm. I set down my fork. Detective, I never threatened anyone. I asked questions about association procedures, that's all. That's what I figured. But Mrs. Whitmore is requesting a restraining order. Says she's afraid for her safety. He paused. Look, I've seen this playbook before. Someone pushes and pushes until the other person snaps, then plays victim when they push back. Don't give her ammunition. A restraining order. Perfect. Now I'd be legally prohibited from defending myself at association meetings. What happens if she gets the order? You stay away from her property, can't contact her directly, and probably can't attend association meetings where she's present. Rodriguez sighed. Like I said, I know the playbook. Best advice? Keep your head down and handle this through lawyers. After he hung up, I sat on my deck watching the sun disappear behind my neighbor's roofline. The smell of charcoal smoke and summer evening air should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. Karen Whitmore wasn't just trying to make me remove my gates. She was trying to remove me from the neighborhood entirely, one carefully orchestrated move at a time. But she'd made one mistake that was about to cost her everything. She'd assumed I was fighting this war alone. Monday morning hit me like a slap in the face. I was barely awake, standing in my kitchen with coffee brewing, when red and blue lights started flashing through my front windows. 2 sheriff's deputies were walking up my driveway like I was some kind of dangerous fugitive. The knock on my door echoed through the house, hard, official, the kind that says, your quiet morning just ended. James Collins. The older deputy was built like a linebacker going soft around the middle. His partner looked young enough to be my son. You're under arrest for criminal threatening and harassment. Have you ever had one of those moments where your brain just refuses to process what's happening, where reality feels like it's sliding sideways? There's been some mistake, I said, but they were already reading me my rights. The younger deputy's hand rested on his handcuffs like he expected trouble. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, sir. The metal was cold against my wrists. Through my front window, I could see Mrs. Chen standing in her yard, phone in her hand, probably recording the whole thing. By noon, video of my arrest would be in every neighborhood group chat. What exactly am I supposed to have done? Karen Whitmore filed a formal complaint, the older deputy said, guiding me toward his patrol car. Says you've been stalking her, making threatening phone calls, creating a pattern of intimidation. Stalking, threatening phone calls. I'd never even spoken to the woman, except at that association meeting. This is completely false. I haven't contacted her at all. That's what they all say. He opened the car door. You can explain it to the judge. The ride to the county jail was 5 miles of pure humiliation. Every traffic light felt like an eternity. Every car we passed a witness to my public shame. The smell of disinfectant and old coffee in the patrol car mixed with my growing rage into something that tasted like metal in my mouth. At the station, they processed me like any common criminal. Fingerprints, photo, personal effects in a manila envelope. The booking officer, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at the charges and shook her head. Neighbor dispute? She asked. Something like that. Piece of advice? Get a lawyer. These things spiral fast once they start. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a holding cell with a drunk driver and a shoplifter, waiting for my lawyer to post bail. The walls were concrete block painted institutional green, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. My phone had 17 missed calls when they finally released me. Tommy Russo, my sister in Phoenix, 2 reporters who'd somehow gotten hold of the story. But the one that made my blood boil was from Linda Parker. "James, I saw the news coverage. Look, I think maybe you should consider moving somewhere else. This neighborhood just it's not working out for anyone." Moving somewhere else. Abandon the house I lived in for 15 years because a neighbor decided she didn't like my gates. That evening, I was standing in my driveway looking at the yellow crime scene tape the deputies had left wrapped around my gate mechanism, like it was evidence in a murder case, when Tommy pulled up in his truck. "Heard about this morning," he said, climbing out. "Complete bullshit. Karen Whitmore just played her ace card. Now, I'm the dangerous neighbor everyone needs protection from." Maybe. Tommy leaned against his truck. Or maybe she just gave us exactly what we needed. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Woman spends weeks documenting every detail of your property, then suddenly you're arrested for stalking her? That's some pretty convenient timing." He pulled out his phone. "Question is, who's she been talking to that helped her build this case so fast?" Tommy had a point. The whole thing felt orchestrated, too smooth, too perfectly timed. You don't go from neighborhood dispute to criminal charges overnight unless someone's pulling strings. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Karen Whitmore didn't cook this up by herself. Someone with connections helped her navigate the system." He scrolled through his contacts. "I know a guy who runs private investigations, military background, good with record searches. Maybe it's time we found out exactly who we're dealing with." By Thursday afternoon, I had my answer. Tommy's investigator friend came by with a manila folder, thick enough to choke a horse. "Your neighbor's been busy," he said, spreading photos across my kitchen table. "Karen Whitmore, age 47, divorced, works as a community development consultant for the city." He tapped one photo. "Guess who signs her consulting contracts?" The photo showed Karen walking out of the city planning office with Mark Davenport, the inspector who disconnected my power. They were laughing like old friends, maybe more than friends. "They're involved?" "More than involved. Davenport's been signing off on her consulting fees for 3 years. Neighborhood improvement projects, code enforcement recommendations, community standards development." He pulled out a bank statement. "She's made $60,000 in the last 18 months, all from contracts Davenport approved." $60,000. Karen wasn't just a busybody neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was running a business, and that business was finding problems in neighborhoods that needed expensive solutions. "There's more," the investigator continued. 3 other properties in this area have been forced into association compliance in the last 2 years. All had expensive modifications that were completed by contractors Karen recommended. The whole scheme clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Karen created problems. The association forced compliance. Karen's recommended contractors got the work. Everyone got paid except the homeowners who footed the bill. I was just the latest mark in a con game that had been running for years. But Karen Whitmore had made one critical error. She'd assumed I'd stay focused on my own problems instead of looking at the bigger picture. Tomorrow night's association meeting was going to be very different than she expected. The association meeting was packed like a championship boxing match. Word had spread about my arrest, and nothing draws suburbanites like the promise of watching a neighbor's public destruction. I counted 43 people crammed into that community center, twice the usual attendance. Karen sat at the front table wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. She kept glancing toward the door like she expected me not to show up. Patricia Stern shuffled papers with the efficiency of someone conducting a funeral service. I took a seat in the back row, manila folder in my lap, and waited. Tonight's agenda, Patricia announced, includes a vote on the Collins property enforcement action and discussion of enhanced security measures for our community. Enhanced security measures, because apparently I was now a threat to neighborhood safety. Karen stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Before we address the Collins situation, I want everyone to know that this has been an extremely difficult period for me personally." Her voice carried just the right note of wounded dignity. No one should have to fear for their safety in their own neighborhood. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable, but most faces showed the kind of righteous anger that comes from believing you're protecting the innocent. The police investigation has confirmed a pattern of harassment and intimidation, Karen continued. Given Mr. Collins' recent arrest, I'm requesting the association take immediate action to protect residents. Patricia nodded gravely. The board has prepared a resolution authorizing legal action to force compliance with community standards, plus additional measures to ensure Mrs. Whitmore's safety. This was my moment. I stood up, folder in hand. I'd like to address the association. The room went dead quiet. Karen's face flushed, but she couldn't object without looking afraid of what I might say. Thank you, Patricia. I walked to the front, feeling every eye in the room tracking my movement. I want to talk about community standards, about what we expect from our neighbors, and what we should expect from our association leadership. I opened my folder and pulled out the first photograph. This is Karen Whitmore leaving the city planning office last Tuesday with Mark Davenport, the inspector who ordered my power disconnected. I held up the photo so everyone could see. They look pretty friendly for two people conducting official city business. Karen started to object, but I kept talking. This is a copy of Mrs. Whitmore's consulting contract with the city. $60,000 over 18 months for neighborhood improvement recommendations. I pulled out the bank records. All contracts signed by Inspector Davenport. The murmurs weren't sympathetic anymore. They sounded confused, suspicious. And this, I said, producing a spreadsheet, shows 3 other properties in our neighborhood that have been forced into expensive compliance modifications over the last 2 years. Anyone want to guess which contractors got those jobs? I didn't wait for an answer. All recommended by Karen Whitmore, all approved by Mark Davenport, all paid for by homeowners who thought they were following association rules. Patricia was frantically shuffling papers, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Karen had gone pale under her makeup. What Mr. Collins is suggesting, Karen said, her voice shaky but defiant, is completely inappropriate. These are baseless accusations designed to deflect from his own violations. Baseless? I pulled out the final photograph. Karen and Davenport having dinner at Rossetti's Italian restaurant, leaning across the table like lovers. This was taken last Friday night, 2 days after my arrest, celebrating maybe. The room exploded, voices raised, people turning to their neighbors, the careful politeness of suburban discourse shattered like glass. Order! Patricia banged her gavel. Order! But there was no containing it now. The truth was out, spreading through the room like spilled wine on white carpet. You want to talk about threats to neighborhood safety? I raised my voice over the chaos. Let's talk about association officers who profit from creating problems they force residents to fix. Let's talk about city inspectors who abuse their authority to help their girlfriends make money. Karen was on her feet, face flushed with rage. This is slander! I'll have you arrested again! For what? Telling the truth? I gathered my papers. Everything I just showed you is public record. Anyone can verify it. And that's when Karen made her final, fatal mistake. You think you're so smart, she snarled, dropping all pretense of wounded innocence. You think you can waltz into my neighborhood and do whatever you want? I've been running this community for 5 years, and I'll be running it long after you're gone. Her neighborhood, running this community. The mask was off completely now. I looked around the room at faces that had shifted from suspicion to understanding to outright anger. These weren't just my neighbors anymore. They were Karen Whitmore's marks, and they were finally realizing it. The vote tonight, I said quietly, shouldn't be about my gates. It should be about whether you want to live in a community or a con game. I walked out of that meeting knowing I'd just lit a fuse that would burn down everything Karen had built. But the explosion was still coming. The phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Friday morning. First call was from Channel 7 News. Second was from the county attorney's office. By 8 o'clock, I had reporters camping in my front yard, and Karen Whitmore's entire world was collapsing in real time. You know that feeling when you've been holding your breath for months and finally get to exhale? That's what I felt watching the first news van pull up to Karen's house across the neighborhood. The reporter, young woman with perfect hair and ambitious eyes, was already setting up for a live shot. My phone buzzed. Text from Tommy. Turn on Channel 7. I flipped on the TV just in time to see the reporter standing in front of Karen's colonial, microphone in hand. "Good morning, I'm Jessica Martinez, reporting from Maple Ridge Drive, where a neighborhood dispute has uncovered what appears to be a systematic scheme involving city officials and association leadership." She gestured toward Karen's house. Sources tell us that Karen Whitmore, who serves as the Homeowner Association's compliance officer, has received more than $60,000 in city consulting fees, while simultaneously forcing neighbors into expensive property modifications. The camera cut to a photo of Karen in Davenport at that restaurant, looking guilty as sin. City Inspector Mark Davenport has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Mrs. Whitmore has not responded to requests for comment. I was still watching the news when my doorbell rang. 3 neighbors stood on my porch: Mrs. Chen, Bob Henderson from 2 streets over, and Linda Parker. Linda looked like she'd been crying. "James," Mrs. Chen said, "we owe you an apology." "We all got played," Bob added. "Karen had us believing you were the problem." Linda stepped forward, wringing her hands. "I'm so sorry. When she showed us those photos, told us about the safety violations, it seemed so reasonable." "Reasonable until you realized she created the violations in the first place," I said. Mrs. Chen nodded grimly. "Bob got fined last year for his mailbox being 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. Had to hire Karen's recommended contractor to move it. Cost him $800. My deck railing," Bob said, "apparently violated height standards that didn't exist when I built it. $1,500 to fix a problem that wasn't a problem until Karen made it one." The scope of it was staggering. How many neighbors had she scammed over the years? How much money had been quietly extorted through fake violations and manufactured crises? "There's going to be another association meeting tonight," Linda said. "Emergency session to address the situation. Patricia's calling for Karen's resignation." That afternoon, I was replacing the sabotaged wiring in my gate mechanism when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of car that meant serious official business. 2 people got out. A woman in a business suit who looked like she could prosecute a murder case before lunch, and a man with the bearing of someone who'd spent years investigating white-collar crime. "Mr. Collins, I'm District Attorney Sarah Brennan. This is Detective Mike Torres from our fraud division." She showed me her credentials. "We'd like to discuss Karen Whitmore and Mark Davenport." We sat at my kitchen table while I laid out everything I'd discovered: the contracts, the photographs, the pattern of forced compliance that had been running for years under everyone's noses. "How many other victims do you think there are?" Torres asked. "In this neighborhood alone? Maybe 15, 20 properties. But if they've been running this scam in other areas..." I shrugged. "Could be hundreds." Brennan made notes on a legal pad. "We'll need you to testify before the grand jury. This kind of systematic fraud, conspiracy between public officials and private citizens. We're looking at serious felony charges." "What about my arrest? The harassment charges?" "Dropped as of this morning. Turns out Karen filed multiple false police reports over the last 2 years, all targeting property owners who resisted association pressure." Torres closed his notebook. "She's facing charges of filing false reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of public office." That evening's association meeting was standing room only. Karen wasn't there. Word was she'd hired a criminal defense lawyer and been advised not to make any public statements. Patricia Stern looked like she'd aged 5 years and 5 days. "The board has accepted Karen Whitmore's resignation," Patricia announced to applause that felt more like relief than celebration. "We're also suspending all pending enforcement actions pending a complete review of association procedures." A complete review. Translation: everything Karen had touched was now suspect. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the board is establishing a fund to reimburse residents for any compliance costs that may have been unnecessarily imposed." I stood up. The room went quiet, waiting to see what the neighborhood troublemaker had to say now that he'd been vindicated. "I don't want reimbursement," I said. "I want my gates reconnected to power, and I want a written apology for 3 months of harassment." "Done," Patricia said without hesitation. But as I looked around that room at my neighbors, people who'd believed the worst about me, who'd been ready to watch me lose my home over manufactured violations, I realized something that should have made me feel triumphant. Victory always comes with a price. Karen was destroyed, Davenport was finished, and the whole corruption scheme was unraveling. But I was still the neighbor who'd blown up everyone's quiet suburban illusions. Some people would always see me as the troublemaker who'd brought chaos to their peaceful community, even though that chaos had been rotting underneath the surface all along. Karen Whitmore had finally gotten what she deserved, but I'd learned something about winning that no one ever tells you in the motivational speeches. Sometimes you can be completely right and still end up standing alone. 6 months later, I'm standing in my driveway watching my electric gates open and close with the smooth precision of German engineering. The power's been restored for weeks, but I still get a little satisfaction every time I hit that remote button. Karen Whitmore pled guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges 3 weeks ago. She got 18 months in federal prison and a $100,000 fine. Mark Davenport took a plea deal for 15 months. The house across the street has a for sale sign that's been there so long it's starting to fade. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Justice served, bad guys punished, neighborhood returns to normal. But that's not how these stories really end. The truth is, I won the war but lost something I didn't expect to lose. The easy friendships, the casual waves from neighbors, the sense of belonging to a community instead of just living next to a bunch of strangers. Mrs. Chen still talks to me, but our conversations are different now, more careful, like she's worried about saying the wrong thing to the man who brought down the association. Bob Henderson nods when he sees me, but we don't chat about baseball scores anymore. Linda Parker moved away 2 months ago. Couldn't handle living across from the constant reminder of how wrong she'd been about everything. I understood, but it still stung. The criminal trial made national news for about a week. Fraud investigators found evidence that Karen and Davenport had been running similar schemes in 4 other neighborhoods. Total damages exceeded $2 million. My story became a case study in suburban corruption that law enforcement agencies now use for training. But here's what nobody talks about in those training seminars. What happens to the whistleblower after the dust settles? I was fixing my front sprinkler last month when a moving truck pulled up to the house where Bob Henderson used to live. New family, young couple with 2 kids. The husband walked over to introduce himself. "You must be James," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mike Cordero. Heard you're the guy who cleaned up this neighborhood." Cleaned up this neighborhood. Like I was some kind of hero instead of a man who just wanted to open his own gates without getting out of his truck. "Just stood up for what was right," I said. "Well, we appreciate it. Real estate agent told us the whole story. Said this was the most honest association in the county now." He grinned. "That's exactly what we were looking for." And that's when it hit me. The real victory wasn't destroying Karen Whitmore or exposing the corruption. It was this. A young family choosing to build their life here because they knew someone had fought to make it a place where honest people could live in peace. Maybe that's worth being the neighborhood troublemaker. Maybe that's worth standing alone sometimes. My phone rang as I was thinking about all this. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. "Mr. Collins, this is Janet Morrison from Oakwood Heights Subdivision. We're having some problems with our homeowner association, and someone suggested we talk to you." Another neighborhood, another Karen, another fight that someone needed to have. I looked at my gates, solid and functional, and exactly as tall as they needed to be. Then I looked at the for sale sign across the street, and at Mike Cordero's kids playing in their new front yard. "Tell me about your problem," I said. Because here's what I've learned. There's always going to be someone who thinks they can run other people's lives. Someone who mistakes authority for righteousness, rules for justice. And there's always going to be someone who has to stand up and say, "Not today." Sometimes that someone is a 52-year-old man who just wanted to install some gates on his own property. Sometimes it's you. The question isn't whether you'll face a Karen Whitmore in your life. The question is what you'll do when you meet her. As for me, my gates work perfectly. My neighborhood is a little more honest than it used to be, and I sleep just fine, knowing that the next family who moves in won't have to deal with what I dealt with. That's victory enough for anyone. If this story hit close to home, maybe think about the Karens in your own neighborhood, and if you're dealing with your own homeowner association nightmare, remember this. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to break it down completely and build something better. The fight's never really over, but sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn enough, you can make sure the next person doesn't have to fight it alone.